Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar hosted by Nitro IT Business Solutions, a division of TUC. Today, we're going to be talking about the complexity of data backup, the moving parts that move your business. And with me today, I have Marlene Maloney, and she is from Datto Canada. How are you today?
I'm good. Yourself?
Good, thanks. I guess first off, let's start off, if you could tell us a little bit about Datto Canada and what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Datto Canada is a Canadian distributor of backup and disaster recovery solutions, and we partner exclusively with Canadian MSPs, Canadian service providers, to provide these solutions to their businesses and essentially provide their businesses that they work with a full business continuity solution. So that's what we're going to get into today, but Datto actually has data centers that are based in Saskatoon, and we provide all the hardware, the software, all the recovery points for our partners to provide to their clients.
Well, then you're the professional that we need to be talking to today, I guess.
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to go on to the first topic here, and I just want to set the stage first, is that as we know, and as the slide says, the technology continues to drive all facets of business process. And I think that's true across the board for all companies in this day and age, regardless of whether or not you could be a not-for-profit to a construction company, to a legal firm, to anything. Your IT backbone is really what makes your company move at all given times. And with that, there are all the, I guess, implications that come along with having anything with that many moving parts. So you have anything from business interruption, loss of data, which, as we all know, can also drastically affect brand and your reputation and how people perceive your company, as well as now, and this is, I think, something that has really come to light in the last little while, which is even the concept of international law. And, you know, that can greatly influence how you govern your data and where it resides and where it should reside and perhaps where it shouldn't reside. So we're going to go on to the first topic here, and this is, I think, something that strikes the fear into most people's hearts when they hear the concept of cloud. I know so many people, you know, when it comes to the IT infrastructure scenario, there is a little bit of fear and loathing of the cloud almost at times. At the same time, we see a lot of people gravitating towards it because it really does become the perfect solution, and a lot of people have now accepted this as something that is you know, really good for their company, and it can do anything from lower cost and so on and so forth. I guess first and foremost, if you could explain to us the difference between private versus public cloud, because I think there's a little bit of confusion there for a lot of people, what cloud is, where your data resides, privately, publicly, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely differences as well as benefits that go with each option. So a private cloud would be a scenario where a business would take on building the infrastructure themselves, supplying the hardware, maintaining the hardware and the whole infrastructure. And the benefits to this for a company, and typically you only see this in large enterprise scenarios because it's very time intensive, labor intensive, that you can really control the data and you can see, you know, what's happening with your data on a day-to-day basis. The issue for many businesses and the smaller, medium-sized businesses is that it is extremely costly to have your employees build it, maintain it, and monitor it. So the public cloud, on the other side of things, is a infrastructure where you would have a third party do all that managing. They would be supplying the hardware, and it really allows you to kind of have this hands-off approach and really have the experts control your data. And for some reason, people have this kind of feeling that their data will be vulnerable if it's in a public cloud. But, you know, there are considerations you need to you know, consider when looking at a public cloud. You know, is it encrypted? How safe is it? You know, how safe are the facilities? So those are all considerations you need to take a look at. You know, cost, maintaining it, and as well as managing it. So it sometimes even combining the two, which is what Datto offers, is another option that you could take a look at as well.
And you bring up a really good point. You know, when it comes to the private cloud scenario, I guess if you would, and maintaining your own network and those type of things, is that I think a lot of people have to look at the fact, and perhaps you see this in your line of work, is that, people, when it comes to companies, they aren't an IT department. They aren't an IT company. They aren't a cloud storage expert. So, it's always interesting that I hear that story of, you wouldn't go to, an architect to have them work on your teeth. So, why would you have someone internally manage your data perhaps that isn't a data expert?
Yep, absolutely. And that's time that you're spending developing it while you could be spending that time in your business.
So now on to the next topic. One of the things I guess is that we should look at is, and this is something, as you were saying, is that people wonder where their data is. They wonder where it's residing. Is that there are legalities, I guess, and even restrictions around now where data can reside, or even the laws that apply to that. Mm-hmm. And if you could explain to me just the importance, I guess, of keeping your data local. And, mm-hmm. and I'm using air quotes here, but local in Canada, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And when you're looking at a supplier or provider, there's a lot of including legalities, legal requirements that you need to think about. It's, as I mentioned before, the transfer of your data, is it being encrypted when it transfers? The facilities that are housing the data, how safe are they? What kind of measures does that provider put in place? Do they have biometrics where an outside individual wouldn't be able to access without key card? But with regards to legalities and keeping the data local, many businesses are transferring their data to the U.S., where this data is subject to not only the Patriot Act, which I'm sure we've all heard of, but it's subject to the laws of the U.S. Typically, the data is being transferred, maybe another country, but the data may not be as protected or as secured as it would be with a Canadian provider.
Right.
So those are all considerations to consider.
And one of the things that I've heard as well is that even in certain organizations, depending on what your organization does, so whether it's, you could be a law firm, you could be a not-for-profit, a lot of the times, and maybe, perhaps people aren't aware of this, is that there are rules and regulations, and even, from a legal perspective, that you're not actually allowed to host your data in another country. So that's something that people should obviously look into as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with organizations, they may not be a law firm or a legal firm, they are actually required to advise their either their employees or their individuals that they're doing business with, their clients, that their data is being housed outside of Canada. So there are legal requirements that they need to consider. And may not be a path that all businesses want to go down.
So now, here's another one, and this is something that comes up, I think, a lot for you guys, but perhaps people don't even really realize what the difference between the two are, which is backup of your data versus the concept of business continuity and business recovery. So tell me the difference between those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And many people confuse the two. They think, well, why do I need business continuity when I'm backing up my data? The questions that you need to ask yourself is, okay, I'm backing up, but what happens if I lose my data, and how long is it going to take me to get up and running? So a simple backup solution is capable of protecting you from data loss, but it doesn't protect you from downtime. And we all know in this day and age that time is money. If your email server is down for a day, your employees don't have access to their emails, a lot of work is not getting done. So it's really important to consider when you're looking at a backup solution, how long is it going to get me up and running? So there's two key metrics in the backup and business continuity world that we use when evaluating these two types of solutions. And one is called the RPO, or the recovery point objective. It's how much data am I willing to lose with the solution. So let's say you're backing up an every hour, and a backup or a business continuity solution can provide you with both. But you can even get one that's backing up every 5 minutes. That's for a backup solution. You're backing up every hour on the hour. Where business continuity differentiates is an RTO. It's the recovery time objective. So how much time is lost after you've lost that data to get you back up and running? A backup solution can sometimes take hours, days, even weeks. A business continuity solution with data will get you back up and running with a matter of minutes. So it's really up to you on how long you can actually wait to get that data back.
Interesting. And I think in this day and age, we have to look at, that time scenario is really important. If we look at, the speed in which business moves, and you brought up a very good point. Say, for instance, email. I think, for the most part, let's put this into a personal perspective. Everyone that's listening today in this webinar, I'm sure, has a smartphone. If you work in business in this day and age, I don't know about you, maybe I have a bit of a problem, but I'm plugged into my phone pretty much 24/7, and I'm, answering emails almost continually because it equals the speed that business runs at. So if you made a really good point, what does happen to a company if they don't have a true business continuity plan and they only have backup and their email goes down or their file system, whatever they have to, they can't access any of their documents, records, anything, is that could be actually very devastating for a company.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And even sometimes I'm even stuck. I'm just writing a document and the screen may freeze, it crashes, and I've lost maybe 2 paragraphs. I get that pit in my stomach thinking, oh my gosh, I could never write what I just wrote. And those are just 2 paragraphs. Imagine losing all your files, your clients' files, employees' data, and that's lost.
The thought of it's making me dizzy.
So to put it on that scale, I think we've all been in that scenario where you're writing, you've lost a document, and it's unfortunate, but that's where business continuity comes in. It's, how long are you willing to wait to recover that lost data?
Now, one of the things that has come up, and this is a big thing about backup and business continuity itself, is that, and again, we talk about, I think when people think business continuity, disaster recovery, and so on, there is this scenario that what constitutes a disaster? A lot of the times I think people look at it, well, as we see it in contracts, right, is the quote-unquote force majeure. It is the scenario of earthquakes, floods, terrible, well, we've had terrible ice storms here in this part of Canada. But I think it goes beyond that, and sometimes I think, and I'm sure you guys see this, is that a disaster to a company could even be simply, and it sounds odd or maybe sometimes humorous to people, but this idea of what happens if the toilet upstairs in the office above you overflows and lands on your server sitting in the back closet in your office space, and you hear the zap, the lights dim, everything freezes on the computers. The question is, now what?
Yeah, it's never as glamorous as people would like to think. It's the flood, the fire, it's a disgruntled employee that will take something. It's maybe a virus, but I think there's this false perception that, nothing will ever happen to me, but things happen, and to have a plan in place, it's kind of like having insurance for your company or your data. It's inexpensive insurance, and if you are able to, if you lost your data for 24 hours, but you've been able to recover it, you've paid for the solution 50 times over. So this insurance allows you to mediate any of those risks.
Now, have you noticed, from your experience in the world of backup and recovery, as we talk about, some of these scenarios of the difference between backup and business continuity, and people come to you and it's like, oh, the toilet just overflowed upstairs, or you talk about disgruntled employees and things, is that is that something that people should be planning for, in their regular sort of IT infrastructure, I guess? Is that, I don't know if a lot of companies actually take into consideration anything from, you mentioned like a virus scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work? Like if there's a virus that's introduced onto your system, can you theoretically just move back in time to a point in which that virus is not within the day? Is that how it works, or?
So if there was a virus, on one of their servers or
Mm-hmm.
their server crashed, what they would be able to do with the data solution is spin up virtual machines and essentially give access within, let's say, 30 minutes to that business and get everybody accessing that virtual server,
Okay.
so that they can start working on that server that had that virus,
Right.
that was affected or was stolen by that disgruntled employee, or
Right.
had the toilet come crashing down on it. So
The nefarious toilet. Yes.
so the idea is that regardless of what happens to a server or a workstation, let's say, that through this solution they wouldn't have to worry about it. They'd have access pretty much
And I
instantaneously.
guess that's the true differentiation at that point, right, is that when we talk about backup versus business continuity, so in the scenario that you just spoke about,
Mhm.
at the point in which they spin up virtual machines, give people access, and they go back to the closet in the back room and get that server back online,
Mhm.
I guess that's where the backup scenario comes in, right? So they would reload the information onto that.
And the great thing about today's technology with regards to business continuity is that it's very reliable. The chances of corruption, it doesn't happen, as opposed to traditional forms of backup where there's a high corruption rate. They're stored in the closet, so has somebody been backing them up? There's a high failure rate, so there's a lot of unpredictability with traditional backups. So this way, if something does happen, that you've been backing up, let's say, every hour, and it's being verified that it's being backed up, and should anything happen, you can get access to those servers right away, and you're not experiencing that downtime.
Right.
Waiting.
One of the things you mentioned as well, and I think this is important, is that, and this goes back to the cloud solution scenario, but security is always a really big thing, and it's as we talk about viruses and disgruntled employees and all that type of thing, is that I think it also makes people just wonder, away from that, is that from a cloud computing perspective, from a backup perspective, and we can put this in context. And this past week, the headlines hit that LinkedIn was hacked, and people were able to get all of this information. Explain to me the security measures that are in place for people, I guess, to put their minds at ease as far as how this material is encrypted and stored, so that we don't see those nefarious hacking acts out there that can get to data.
Yeah, so what happens is that when the data is being transferred, it's using a encryption level of 256, and that is the highest level of security, and it's basically meaning that even if the data was stolen, there would be no way that that individual be able to crack that code. So the transfer of data is secure, and then once it arrives at the facilities, the data centers, then that's where we put those measures in place. There's biometrics, so only people that have actually met a standard of security are able to access the data centers. They access using biometrics, so they can scan by using certain characteristics and traits. So the way that this solution is set up is that the data is encrypted and transferred. The data facilities are all meeting government requirements to securely house that data. So
it sounds very futuristic.
Yeah,
very
it does actually.
Biometrics is always just a really kind of side, but we won't get into that today. So we have some questions from the listening audience. I'm just going to have our producer here pull these up on the screen for us so we can answer these. Looks like we have quite a few coming in.
Perfect.
So here's the first one. It says, can I segment my data with different levels of backup availability and continuity?
Can I see?
I think what they're trying to ask is if you have your email system is not as important as your,
Oh, yeah.
7 years ago financial records, which are still important. How do you, they have different levels of availability?
So there's a lot of customization that you can do with this solution. So when you're backing up, you're typically taking a full image of the server that's going onto this local appliance that we provide. And when you're restoring, you can definitely do get more granular and do file level restores. But if you want to segment, we actually have the ability to prioritize Exchange server to be backed up before your BES server, because we all know how critical Exchange is. So you can definitely segment in the way that you can kind of pick what you want to be a priority, but you can also kind of break it down and select, if you really want to get into files and folders. But the whole idea with our solution is that you're getting that full image because it's that business continuity model that should anything happen, you've got everything, and then you can get nitty-gritty with the details you want to restore.
And that's excellent because it obviously affects speed, right? Is that because you prioritize now your data, is that it comes down to all the things that are, really, really important that we need this minute.
Yeah.
You can have almost instantaneous access to. And the stuff that isn't so detrimental to the daily business life can, go back into that backup scenario where it can be restored at, well, we'll say at leisure. So here's another question. This one's an interesting one because it shows that there's actually a company out there that is listening that actually does disaster and business recovery exercises within their company. So it says, is it easy to run a recovery exercise to practice? My company has a disaster exercise once a year. Can we still do this with a live system? Wow, that's a keener.
Yeah.
Company's actually maybe doing it right. Excellent.
Yeah. So we do have, you can do this at any point. Typically, our partners will set this up internally and run a test environment that protects them from anything outside of that. But if you wanted to do that with the business that you're working with, definitely they can set up a disaster exercise that runs within a test environment. So absolutely, because you want to make sure that this is working for you and that you can test it at any point.
Excellent. And it's important to get, I think, in any of these scenarios, we can talk technology, for probably, hours upon days upon weeks, but I think it's also important in getting humans involved in this, because after all, that's really what it comes down to, is getting the, information back within the hands of the people that need it. So speaking of technology, and here's the thing, is that we're coming actually to the end of our webinar, and I know that we've covered everything on a very high level today, but one of the ideas was with this is that we wanted to ensure that we covered, the basics so people understand the differences between private and public cloud, the difference between backup and business continuity and so on. So one of the things that you were saying is that you guys will be offering a more technically oriented webinar, I guess, or sort of user session coming up in the next couple of weeks through Nitro as well. So one of the things that I guess we'll be covering is obviously a more, the in-depth scenario of how this is really backed up, and then I guess everything from types of servers to everything that the IT crowd would like to know. So we'll be sending out an invitation to that shortly to everybody that has attended this one. And I guess other than that, I just want to thank you for answering all of our questions today and joining us on this webinar. And if anyone has any information, the contact information is on the screen for the Nitro contact for everything that has to do with data backup and business recovery.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. And again, once we send out the technical invite, then we can definitely take a more in-depth look at the solution from a technical standpoint.
That will be excellent. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.